So we're going to begin with our first presentation today. Balbir Gurm was raised in Vancouver and is a member of the Faculty of Health at Kwantlen Polytechnic University and is a consultant. Balbir is also a facilitator in AMSA's Safe Harbor Respect for All program, a diversity and inclusion training program for employers. She's the founding editor-in-chief of Transformative Dialogues, Teaching and Learning Journal. Dr. Gurm was honored with the Teaching Excellence Award from the College of Registered Nurses of British Columbia in 2000, the NYSOD Teaching Excellence Award from the University of Texas in 2000, and Academic Excellence Awards from the Times of Canada in 2013 and Shakti in 2014. She currently teaches a fourth-year course on social and organizational change and facilitates change projects in the community. She is a member of the City of Surrey's Diversity Advisory Committee and the facilitator for Never, the network to eliminate violence in relationships. Dr. Gurm is a passionate educator, leader, and change agent who believes that our actions are influenced by history and context, including power and politics, and need to be grounded in reality, and educators need to translate academic knowledge into community actions. Dr. Gurm is a sought-after speaker and consultant for inclusive practices and organizational change, and we're very fortunate to have her here with us today.
Okay. Well, first I'm going to take the podium away here. So different styles of presenting. So Katie, thank you very much for that introduction. Let me know if I stray away from the mic. I'm going to try not to. I want to start by acknowledging that we are on Indigenous territory, just like Katie said, the Salish traditional territory, and I want to thank them for sharing this land with us. And I learned the name of our city in Salish. It's Kam Lai. I never knew that. So that's what Vancouver is. So cultural safety. So why am I talking about cultural safety? I think ever since I was in university, I learned cultural competency, but it was defined to me as South Asians, being South Asian. I was listening to that part carefully in nursing school. They said, oh, South Asians, don't look at them in the eye. They usually live with extended families, and you know the stereotypes. And I always sat there and I thought, well, I'm not like that, but I come from Indian heritage, right? And so it's never sit right with me. And I'll give you a little bit of the history. When I talk about the history of cultural safety, I'll insert myself into it. But that's when I first got started, just questioning all the literature and the knowledge that existed around cultural competency, cultures, intercultural communication, known by many different labels. So I better move this to just talk. Okay, so I've got the goals of the presentation. Those are goals for me. So when I have them for you, I call them ends in view. So substitute goal of presentation with ends in view. And ends in view means that that's where I'm trying to get you to. But if you actually get there or not will be up to you. I can't make you learn. I can only stand here and gab, right? Okay, oh, that didn't do that. Here we go. So culture and ethnicity. Usually we're trying to define culture and then we're saying, is it the same as ethnicity? What is it? Right? I'm sure a lot of you have done that, trying to think about what it means. So when most people think of ethnicity, or think of culture, they first think of ethnicity, right? This is from our Fusion Fest in Surrey. All these pictures are taken from there. Even though I sit on the diversity committee and I have other ideas, but this is what we come up with at Fusion Fest. What do we think about? In culture, we think about people of different nationalities, I'll say that, even though if you ask me, they're all Canadian, okay? But that's how people define them. And then next they think about, oh, different clothing, right? We can see the different clothes up there. Music, right? Different instruments. Dance is huge, right? And so those are the kind of things we think about. The food people eat, what is it? But we don't actually get to what I like to talk about here. Just excuse me, I'm trying to work two computers here at the same time. Okay, so the top things are the ones we thought of first when we were thinking of culture, right? The arts, the festivals, the performing arts, the literature, language, right? Customs, holidays, games, dress. I had somebody call dress a traditional costume. I thought, oh, that's an interesting name for a person's dress. Okay, I'd never thought of it as a costume before. But anyways, so when we think of culture, we have kind of got that training to jump to that. But what I want us to look at is, and I'm sure everybody in this room probably knows this model, is what's under it, right? The iceberg model. So the first step is great, but we need to dig. We need to figure out what are people's values, assumptions, that are based on their experience, not necessarily their ethnicity. We need to think of things like, oh, my computer doesn't want to cooperate here. I'll do this one. So we want to think about all these things. What are their normal rules? What are the expectations? What do they think about social status, about their notion of themselves, their perception, their attitudes about aging, views on raising children, what they think is fair, what is cleanliness to them, importance of time. Oh, I can tell you, I hate it when people are not on time. But you know, everybody has a different notion of time, and especially our assumptions about ourselves and about others. I mean, this is not an inclusive list. If I had time, like I usually do a one-day workshop, I would get you all to tell me these things plus more. Okay, so culture. Then one of the definitions for culture is a system of shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, and artifacts that members of a particular community use to cope with their world and with one another, and that are shared between and within generations, right? That's a common definition, and it's one that my professional organization, the College of Registered Nurses of BC, has adopted. So the one I like to use is the one I've got on the screen for you now. It's learned and shared knowledge that's specific to groups, and it helps generate behavior and interpret experience in the world. Okay, so just a slight variation. And it's not limited to things such as roles, communication, right? Quite often we talk about language. What are the common courtesies? Do you say please, thank you, open the door? Those types of things. Manners of interacting. Do you look people in the eye? Do you not look at them? What are expected behaviors? In that sometimes we have different gender roles, right? Women are supposed to behave like this, men are supposed to behave like that. What are some of the rituals? And how are relationships defined? What are some of the thoughts, the beliefs, the assumptions? So for every group, there's a culture. For example, if I am with my family, I have a culture. If I am with this group, I have a culture. If I am a member of a church group, I have a culture. If I'm with my female friends, I have a culture. If I'm with my male friends, I have a culture. So culture is fluid, and that's going to get to my next slide in a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. But the point I want to make is that culture keeps shifting, and we are full of multiple cultures and intersectionalities. And that is one of the key points I want us to remember, and I'll go to the next slide because I started talking about it. So culture is unique and it's fluid. And what I mean by that is that no two people have the same culture, okay? So if I talk about myself, not my sister, not my brother, not my mom, not my dad, not my children, my son or my daughter, have the exact culture that I do. Okay, are you still with me? Okay. All right, so, and each of us uses those identities for ourselves of whatever that culture is to filter out things or filter in things. And it's very unique. And it keeps changing because as we interact with the world, we as people change. And I'm going to give you an example because I'm thinking being here in the Lower Mainland, most of you have learned something about Sikh culture or the Sikh religion, which I identify with. So it was about 10 years ago. Oh no, I should give you my understanding before I get to that story. So when I was a child growing up, my understanding of Sikhi was, which is what most of you will be familiar with, is that we have 10 gurus, right? And we have a God, and it's the same God for everyone, right? That was the general assumption that I was raised with. But when my mom passed away about 10 years ago, I had to make sense of her death. So I started to read about my religion, about Sikhism. And I read the original writings, I read the historical writings, I read the translations, and I talked to academics in India. I was fortunate enough to, on a different project, I was back and forth, and I met academics who were doing translations for the Guru Granth Sahib, which is the teachings of the Sikh religion. And I came to understand that, you know what, God is actually a force or the energy that is in all of us and the entire universe. So that is God. Together, the universe makes up God. Okay, so different from what I understood Sikhi to be as a young child, right? And then I also learned that Sikhism is not a religion. It was made a religion over time historically, but when Guru Nanak actually created the philosophy, it was a reaction to the oppressions of the day, okay? So what he did was he spoke up against it, and I label him the father of justice, because he spoke up against social class. He spoke up against oppressed women, or the oppressors at the time, which were mainly the Mughal empires of the day, right? The kings who wanted to just overtake everything. So that just shows you how culture shifts as we learn, as we interact. And that's one of the keys to understanding cultural safety, okay? So we should not stereotype based on ethnicity or any category for that matter, whether we're talking homelessness or whatever it is, because that helps us stereotype, okay? Oh, better move my slides along. Okay. Moving this one too much faster than the other one. Here we go. Let's back up. So if we want to, no, wrong slide. Let's just go back. I get caught up and then I start going all over the place. That's why I was trying to stick to my notes today. I was telling Katie, I said, otherwise we're going to be here for 4 hours. Okay, let me just get back on track of what I'm supposed to be doing here. I'm trying to find the same slide I've put up for you. Okay. So I don't say too much about it. So we're using apples, okay? You can substitute people into them if you want. So we all do this, okay? We always other. They're not like us, right? So, but first, when we look at the lovely apples, we say, oh, there's apples, right? And then we start saying, oh, there's a green apple. Oh, one has moisture on it. Oh, let's see if I can point. Oh, wrong computer. Let's see. Okay, so then we have a green apple over here. And then this one has moisture. Oh, this one has no leaves. This one has 2 leaves. And 3 of them actually have 3 leaves. And one has a bite taken out of it. Some look more round than others. You get what I'm getting at, right? So then we start discriminating little different pieces. And we start trying to determine what's different about everybody. Or we go the other way and we make generalizations. So there's two ways of looking at it. But generalizations are a problem on their own. So if we look at the kind of generalizations I teach, research, right? Statistics. So if you look at our Canadian statistics for 2011 and you look at British Columbia, and it says we have 1.46 children. I'm willing to bet any one of you that you don't know a single person that has 1.46 children, okay? And that's exactly how I used to feel when I would hear South Asians are like this, or because I never met anyone that was exactly like the textbook told me they were. So that, anyways, that makes my point, I think. Okay, let's just move on. So we don't want to stereotype. We know we do discriminate, but we want to make a cultural shift. So we don't want to do the checklist I was talking about where you say, you know, people are like this or they're like that, which are overgeneralizations that lead us to stereotyping. So what we want to do is look at the examination of power in relationships. That's another one of the key elements in cultural safety. So if you have a client sitting in front of you, you hold the power in your service provider areas because they've come to you for assistance. They may not know the system. They might have lots of questions, but they hold the power, or you hold the power in that relationship. So one of your goals to try to deal with it, and I'm going to make an assumption here I go, that you want to work with people and you want to help and give help that they want, okay? So those are the assumptions in cultural safety, is that we want to work in a partnership, we want to create a positive relationship, and so in order to do that, we have to look at ourselves. Okay, so what are the assumptions that we have about the person in front of us? And don't say you don't have any and you're neutral, because we know that's not true. All of us have assumptions. We may not always be conscious of them. Okay, so the work is hard because we have to figure out what are we assuming. I mean, I'm making a bunch of assumptions about what you guys do for employment, right? But I know I'm making those assumptions, right? So that's the kind of dialogue you want to have with yourself. Okay, what assumptions am I making? But what I want to do is actually get the person's story, because I don't want to use the assumptions I may know from reading about certain groups of people, you know, whether it's low-income people or whoever it is, or the story I was reading yesterday, they were saying that our street workers, when they go into the hospitals, are being treated like second-class citizens. Those are my words, that wasn't the article. But basically, they're being discriminated, and they're not being taken seriously, because my coworkers, the health profession, is making assumptions about who are street workers. Okay? So those are the kind of things that we need to be aware of. So if you have that kind of information, I'm not saying that it's useless, but what it is that you have to be aware that it doesn't really apply to anyone in particular, just like the 1.46 children doesn't apply to anyone in particular. Okay, that's just a broad brush we paint when we do statistics, and we try to create themes if we do qualitative research, and we say people are like this. But that's just to help us get a global understanding, but not a particular understanding of anything. Okay, so keep that in mind. So I'm going to come back to this in a bit, but I'm going to talk about philosophy next. Okay, so there's different philosophical lens, and a philosophy is just how we choose to understand this world and what we believe is truth. I'm simplifying this. We could do a whole course on philosophy. Okay, so what I want us to do is think of how we understand it to be truth. The one we learned in school, most of us, I think, if you're a product of our BC system anyways, or I learned, was through an empirical lens, right? We memorized a bunch of facts, and then we wrote exams. And I still do that sometimes in my classes. They have to memorize facts and, regurgitate them. But then there's another philosophical lens, which is called phenomenology, okay? So, and that's where social construction comes in. Because in phenomenology, we believe that based on our experiences and our interactions and the story that's narrated in the larger world is how we come to understand truth. Like right now, the big thing going on is about being scared of Syrian refugees. We'll get back to that later too. But while I'm thinking of it, especially in Paris, or look at Donald Trump, he said, just keep all the Muslims out. Okay, so that's just a reaction, right? We're stereotyping here. It's not allowing us to understand each person's story or what they're like. So in this way, we know that everybody constructs their own reality, and there's multiple realities. Exactly the truth you recognize, or I recognize, or Katie recognizes, is slightly different. It's going to have a lot of commonalities, but it's not going to be exact, okay? So that's another important concept. So if we want to take a simple example, we could look at any of these chairs. If you're getting a view from the back, you're seeing something else. And if you're looking from the front, you're seeing something else. So that's a simplistic way of trying to explain it, but it's just that we have our own positions, our own histories, our own ways we interpret language, verbal, nonverbal, to come to an understanding about what's happening around us. And that's what we call social construction, okay? So in social construction then, you're saying knowledge is created as we interact with all things in our environment. And it's not static, and it's not just what we learn in school, okay? Sometimes people think that knowledge is just learned in school, and I would argue that that's a very small part of it. And what we do in schools is just try to indoctrinate people into thinking the way we think, okay? I'm going to be off topic a bit, but we say we create critical thinkers in school, and I will argue we don't. All we do is try to reproduce ourselves, and that's what we've been trying to do for a very long time in education. Okay, so that's a piece of what we learn, but not everything. So what our knowledge and understanding is the totality of our experience, okay? And it's what we believe to be right and what we know for ourselves. It's called personal knowing. I won't get into the whole different ways of knowing right now, but it's one of the ways of knowing. Okay. So that's social construction. Okay. How many of you have seen this one before? Well, take away the safety part on top. I know for decades we were teaching this model. We were saying, okay, first, we want you to be culturally aware that people are different, right? There's a difference. We just talked about that. And it's important. I mean, I think we all know people are different. And then cultural sensitivity, that to recognize we need to respect difference, right? I think we can all agree on that. Where I get into difficulties is with cultural competence. In the old model of cultural competence, and I'm redefining it for you because I want to keep this model. In the old model of cultural competence, it was, like I was telling you before, a focus on skills, on a particular knowledge and an attitude of the practitioner. Do you all remember going to cultural competency training? Yeah, so that's where we talked about, you got Chinese Canadians, you got South Asians, you got this is what they're like, and so this is your checklist, right, on how you're going to deal with them. So I want to move away from that. In the cultural safety model of competency, what I want is for you to do self-reflection and have an understanding of what are your cultural values, what are your norms, and then how may this, how do you interact with the person in front of you and try to get at what is that person's socio-political history, okay? And what is their culture and what is important to them, okay? So it's not to overlay what we think somebody is like, but just to simply ask them. So the big thing is about our own histories, beliefs, assumptions, which sometimes are hard to tease out. So one of the big reasons, you probably already guessed it, for the shift to cultural safety was that we didn't want to have a list of do's and don'ts that define how to treat a client of a given culture or ethnic background or whatever you want to call it. And we wanted to debunk the idea that cultural communities exist as isolated societies with shared, homogeneous cultural meaning. Okay, and I think I've been through telling you enough about that. And the fact that cultural factors are always not central to your communication. So let me give you an example of that. If you come to me and I'm your emergency nurse and you're having a heart attack, I'm not going to worry about what your culture is, and nor do you want me to worry about what your culture is. You want me to give you CPR and do anything I need to do to revive you, okay? So we wanted to be a part of cultural safety too, to give people the freedom that they don't have to feel guilty because they didn't have this interaction with their client to determine what their culture was and what would be respectful. It doesn't have to apply in all cases, okay? So it gets a little bit tricky. Okay, so what we do want to look at, not in an emergency situation, but power relationships, gender, sexuality, spiritual beliefs, socioeconomic status that can remain invisible, especially if you look at that iceberg model that I was showing you earlier, because people tend to focus on the top and they have this recipe approach, and then they forget about things that actually matter. Okay, so in cultural safety, it's predicated on understanding the power differentials inherent in any service delivery and redressing these inequities. So the things I've been mentioning. So through educational processes, cultural competency in my model then is being self-aware, developing listening, questioning, and empathy skills, and learning ways to develop genuine partnerships, okay? Genuine partnerships with clients, and not learning certain stereotypes that teach you to be a certain way with a group, okay? So it's all about the person in front of you and how they want to be seen. Okay, so a little bit about history before I continue down that road again. I don't know how many of you know the history of cultural safety, but it was a doctoral dissertation by a nurse in Maori, Erekti Ramsden, in the 90s. I think it was around 96, and I read it when she first published it. And she's Indigenous herself, and she, like myself, was sick and tired of people defining who they were as a people. And so she started to talk about why so many of them had lower self-esteem. The statistics, I think Jas will give some later, in terms of Aboriginal populations and health and different things. But anyways, she was looking at the historical oppressions which were the root causes of the way things were currently. And so when I read that, it just resonated with me. And since then, yes, it's applied to Aboriginal people. In Canada, we've got a lot of Aboriginal organizations that have taken on cultural safety, and there's cultural safety centers. But what I've done is applied it to all disadvantaged groups, because the principles apply to all of us. And I'm in a bit going to talk about the historical oppressions of BC since, oh, sorry, guys online, since most of us are here in BC, we're going to talk about that. And so some of the disadvantaged groups I have listed there are the Chinese Canadians, the Japanese Canadians, the South Asians, women, which most of us are in this room, and refugees, which we've got quite a few of them coming in. So we're going to apply the concept then to all disadvantaged groups. And here's the definition. So you're finally getting a definition out of me for cultural safety. So environment that is spiritually, socially, and emotionally safe, as well as physically safe for people, where there is no assault, challenge, or denial of their identity, of who they are and what they need. Not what we need as service providers, but what they need. And it is about shared respect, shared meaning, shared knowledge, and the experience of learning together. And a big concept underlying all of that is trust. So one of the skills then in cultural safety would be establishing trust. Okay? So then step one is to acknowledge that we are all bearers of our culture, just like I've been talking about. And then next, we want to expose the social, political, and historical context of services and interrupt unequal power relations. I say that because most of our systems are still Western European and privileged men, okay? And we can talk about that in a bit too. So the cultural safety approach allows us to learn about unique histories, current challenges, and successes of our clients. While a clinician can be unfamiliar with the culture of a particular client, the direct approach is the best approach. So what you're going to do is you're going to ask the client what it is that they want you to understand about his or her culture and background so that you can work with them in the most appropriate manner. At the same time, we are going to be culturally safe practitioners, aware of our own culture, right? Sensitivity to cultures in general. And we're going to be very clear in our own minds, oh, I've moved too far on my slides, about what our personal biases are and what that impact is going to have on the person in front of us. So even though I've said that before, it's like if I have, who do I have? Say if I have a woman, oh, let's just do the street woman just because I was reading about them earlier. And I'm going to make up a bunch of assumptions about street people. They really don't want to work. They get themselves into this mess. If they wanted a job, BC's unemployment rate isn't that high. They could easily find a job. They choose this lifestyle. What am I doing? Okay? A lot of you may feel that. I don't, but that's the example I'm using. And so if they're my assumptions, I have to be aware of them. Okay? Oh my God, is that what I'm thinking about this person? Okay, so let's talk to the person. What are they really like? Okay, even though I might have these crazy assumptions at the back of my head, the important part of it is not that you can't have assumptions, because we all do, but to think about how's that going to impact the person when I open my mouth, my first meeting with them. And from other research always stereotypes, we say within 30 seconds, people have made up their mind about the person in front of them. Okay? So you're working against that when you're trying to acknowledge what are your assumptions, your beliefs about this particular person in front of you, and then going, oh, stop. I got to learn from that person. So just keep that one in mind. And then one of the other definitions we had given you, and I've talked about a bit, is power and privilege, and thrown that language around. And again, every time I do this, I talk about power and privilege, the advantage enjoyed by white males. Okay? And a lot of people will agree with me, but again, it's a stereotype. Not all white males have this advantage. But when we look at statistics, and I can give you statistics from post-secondary education, you know that if you're a white male in post-secondary, on the average, you are paid, I think it's about $12,000 more than a female of color. Okay, and then we have everything in between. So that's what we mean by privilege. And not everybody recognizes their privilege. So when I do a workshop, we go through how to figure out what your privilege is. But so that's power. So you can you're taking advantage of a situation that is not enjoyed by others. Okay? And I know in the women's movement, the poor white men have been singled out so many times. But I went with the stereotype. Okay, and then the other words we throw around are oppression and equity, and you've heard me say oppression a number of times, right? So that's using power and authority to create inequity or unfairness, okay? An example could be a boss that treats two people differently. So if, who's a boss? I'll pick on Katie. So person A comes up to Katie, we'll say John comes up to Katie and says, Katie, I need a week off. I'll just make up a reason. And Katie says, oh, why do you need a week off, John? Well, because I need to spend time with my kids. I'm a single dad, don't have anybody to take care of them. And Katie goes, oh, sure, go for it. And then person B, we'll call her Susan, comes up to Katie and says, Katie, I need a week off because I need to, what does Susan need to do? Oh, we can say she needs to take care of her kids too. We'll make it a similar situation because my babysitter just isn't coming in today. And then Katie turns around and says, no, Susan, you're expected to be at work. Okay, not that Katie would do that, but that's sort of unequal treatment or inequity, okay? So it could be oppression by gender if I was gonna start analyzing the situation now, but that's sort of what I'm talking about. And that's just a very, very simple example, and they're not so simple in real life. Half the time we can't even notice the oppressions in our organizations. So historical oppression does shape our actions. And so we're going to look at, I think in the next slide, yes we are, okay. So in the next slide, we're going to look at some of the historical oppressions of British Columbia. I mean, this has been enough in the news about residential schools, okay? So in the 19th century, the Canadian government believed it was responsible for educating and caring for Aboriginal people in Canada. It thought their best chance for success was to learn English and adopt Christianity and Canadian customs. And some people still believe this. Ideally, they would pass their adopted lifestyle onto their children. So once they went through these residential schools, then Native traditions would diminish or be completely abolished in a few generations. So that was the grand Canadian plan. The Canadian government developed a policy called aggressive assimilation to be taught at church-run, government-funded industrial schools, later called residential schools. The government felt that children were easier to mold than adults. We know that. Even in prevention programs I'm involved in, we always say, let's go to the kindergarten because that's where, some of their ideas are formed. So anyways, they figured children were easier to mold than adults, and the concept of a boarding school was the best way to prepare them for life in mainstream society, okay? And residential schools were federally run, I'm sure you all know that, under the Department of Indian Affairs. Attendance was mandatory, Agents were employed by the government to ensure all Native children attended, and there were penalties, etc. I know we look at this and we go, I better be really fast. How could we let this happen? But it existed. The last one was shut down just in 1996. I mean, that's an awful history for us. Okay, the other one, this one I'm most familiar with, is the the Continuous Journey Act of 1908-1947, and most of you might know it as the Komagata-Maru ship, which you see displayed there, and how they were turned back from our harbor here. But this, again, was based on immigration law that was put through in January 8th, 1908, where they said that any person trying to come here cannot stop anywhere to refuel their ship. And so what it was meant to do was keep people from India out. That was the intent of the policy, but they made it look like it was not discriminatory, right? I won't say too much since I'm running out of time. And then the next one, we've heard an apology for, right? The Chinese head tax. Many Chinese were originally recruited in the 1880s, right? And then later on, they found that they were entering, even though I think we had 82,000 enter, and they thought, oh my God, we're getting too many Chinese in. So then they started to put an exorbitant head tax on, and the act was in effect until 1947, long way. Okay, I'm gonna be super quick here. And then the next one is the War Measures Act. And if you remember, this was put in for security reasons, they said, in 1914 for the wars. But what it essentially did was take our Japanese Canadians from the West Coast without their belongings and move them into the interior. Again, another discriminatory practice that we all live with today. That's one of our historical oppressions. Getting to the current ones, the refugees that are soon to come, actually I think the first plane has landed, we have certain ideas again about what are we to do? And you've had reactions from some of our public saying, why are we bringing in refugees? Do you know you're letting in terrorists? And I've heard that from people who I would not expect to hear that from on the street and in my conversations. So again, at least this time it's not our government putting in the legislation to keep them out. It is people on the street creating a narrative as to what is truth. Because you know what's talked about, what media reports, everything formulates truth for us or gives us stereotypes. And so right now, a lot of what we're seeing in the media are pictures which could look like that, which would make you think, oh, well, maybe all kids are terrorists, all these males. But again, I don't want you to have those assumptions. Well, no, I can't say that. I want you to recognize you have those assumptions so that you're not applying whatever your assumptions are to anyone or everyone in front of you, but you're actually thinking about what is their story, how were they oppressed, and ask them, right? That's I think, one of my key messages, just ask them. So transition to culturally safe practices, just a summary, acknowledge that we are all bearers of culture, expose the social, political, and historical context of people, and that goes for new immigrants, it goes for older immigrants, multiple generations of immigrants. It recognizes unequal power relations. Again, it's the narrative of our collective histories, and to understand uniqueness of each person. So given that the clients exist simultaneously within several systems, and we're influenced by our family, our community, our traditions, then the culturally safe practitioner, which is going to be all of us, is going to allow the patient to define what is culturally safe for them. What we're going to try to do is disrupt the power relations. We're going to advocate for our clients. And again, I keep repeating, the first step is going to be to figure out what is our own culture, so that when we are talking to others, we can recognize our impact. So some of the things about what is safe is actions which recognize and respect cultural identities of others. We meet others' needs and expectations, and we don't do any harm. If we're unsafe, we're disempowering or demeaning the identity of the person in front of us. We're decreasing their well-being, and we are causing damage. So the process to assess cultural safety is 2 layers. Organizational, where you're looking at policy audits, you're looking at harassment-free workplace language, there may be holiday calendars, you're looking at flexibility within the workplace, inclusion based on human rights, and also the employment code, okay? So those are the 2 layers, but the most important thing, because I know I'm out of time, to keep in mind is that it is about what the person says. So if you look at this, it's the personal reflection we're already doing, recognizing our own culture, but to see if we're actually culturally safe, this is the most important piece, is the client feedback. So if you're looking at an organization, it would be the feedback from the employees to see if the organization is safe. And if we're looking at the practitioner, it's how much control are we allowing our clients to have, so they give us feedback on that. Did they have a clear understanding? Were we doing it together? How were decisions made? Were we respectful? Did we form a good relationship with them? And that's it. Thank you.